Because there's a severe lack of, I feel like, male role models out there. What we see is what's presented to us in the media, which questionable in the best of times.
I think one of the things we deal with in modern society is that of competition. Everyone feels that they have to compete. Everyone's, it's them against us, or it's me against you, or whatever it is. And I think that's setting modern society up for failure. I look at my daughter's generation. They're spoilt and entitled. If you screwed up when you were a kid, when I was a child, there was pain pretty shortly afterwards, and it might have been a mental anguish. You were precluded from doing something, or it was physical and immediate and stung, and you didn't like it. We protect our children too much from reality now, so they get what they want, and I'm completely guilty of this. They get what they want. They go through school with a very mediocre measurement system, which isn't about pass or fail. It's about effort, and effort's very important in life. And I didn't like school. I'm not an academic, so I never scored particularly well at anything. But I was very conscious that if I didn't put effort in, I would fail, and that failure was absolute. There was no mummy or daddy coming and saving the day. And I think the reality of life, instead of easing into it step by step as a younger person, and the horrendousness of teenagers and hormones and all that other crap that arrives in that space in their life, they get mollycoddled to an extent, and that's again, I think I'm being unfair, and I think I'm also probably picking on a very slim socioeconomic group. I personally think that social media is a scourge. I don't think it's a benefit. It's fun for catching up, it's fun for sharing stuff and seeing what people are doing with their lives, but it prints or imparts an ideal that to me is extremely weak. So for example, we celebrate the Kardashians. I've got no clue why. I got, they're just a family. Mum seems to have been very, very clever. There's some strong personalities in it, but I don't look at them and go, oh my God, they're extraordinary. And even the just been youngest ever billionaire entrepreneur or whatever, she, by her own admission, has leveraged this massive following she has to be successful. So anyone else in the world that decided to set up a makeup business would have to overcome brand. Who am I? This is why you should buy me. If she didn't ever have that barrier. So she's been very clever. I'm not saying that she's not clever in leveraging this massive awareness of her through social media. Whether or not you feel like you should aspire to, the father figure in that family who isn't anymore, not so much. And I think one of my favourite programs for a long time was NCIS, and the key guy on that used to always say that apologising is a weakness, which I completely disagree with. It's much easier to, rear your horns out and get belligerent when you don't want to apologise for something than saying that you've made a mistake, owning that mistake and apologising for it. And I believe masculinity is about values and morals, and it's about standing up for what is right and protecting your family and your friends and taking the appropriate stand where it's needed. And to that end, people, if a man abandons his position as a parent, he's failed. The relationship with the mother may fall apart. Okay, we adults are stupid, we make dumb decisions, we do silly things. Completely understand that. But if you have a child, you have to be a father, and you have to be a present father, and you work that shit out with the mother and try not to behave badly. So one of my great gauges of masculinity is, are you a good parent or not? Because if you're not, I don't care how cool your car is or what team you played rugby on or what your girlfriend looked like, completely irrelevant to me. You have failed at one of the fundamentals. And, we keep forgetting what the point of us being here is. And it's supposed to be the procreation of our species and keeping that alive, which I find ironic given that we're the most problematic species on the planet and screwing the future for our children as we destroy the planet around us. The whole masculinity thing is getting lost in an era where we've got a lot of politically correct bullshit and that's exactly how I see it, this weird, whatever they call it now, misappropriation of culture. My kids can't dress up as cowboys and Indians because that will offend a whole lot of people. Well, I have this, for me, that sort of position feeds bigotry. What you're doing is saying, you're putting it under a different heading, but it's no different from saying you can't integrate, you can't behave with or include with other cultures. And I really disagree with that. If my kid wants to run around dressed as an Indian, crack on. And if someone has a problem with it, they should come and see me. But one of the things I hate is social media gives people an option to voice their opinion in a state of protection and cowardice. And I reckon there should be a filter for social media. And I believe Socrates, he had a cunning plan for information called the test of 3, and that should be what is applied to anything put on social media. And his first question was, is it true? And then, is it good? And then, is it useful? Now, if you look through social media, most of the crap on there fails each of those tests. People have an opinion, they will voice their opinion, and they feel righteous about it or whatever it is. If you criticize their opinion, all hell breaks loose.
I found it quite interesting that you brought up Socrates, because the thing with Socrates, he actually came up with the idea of democracy, but he actually was very specific in the way he said it. He funny, and this kind of relates back to social media and giving people a voice. His own life actually was a very good representation of that, because he said if you give a voice to everybody, then a lot of bad decisions could be made. His life was put on trial because people were deeming him to be a disruption to the social order, and in the end, in a fit of irony, they made it a public vote of whether he should be killed or not. The public voted, and they voted for him to die, so they forced him to drink hemlock and commit suicide. And he literally proved in his death what would happen if you give a voice to the general masses.
Prior to the Trump becoming president, there were a lot of interviews of Trump supporters, and I remember somewhere between laughing and crying, they were interviewing one guy down south who didn't like Obama because when the trade towers got brought down in New York with those bombings, Obama was conspicuously absent from the White House and showed poor leadership. When the reporter explained to this guy that Obama hadn't been the president at the time, that was somehow irrelevant. And I thought, right, so this person will be taking a public position where they vote, and that is what they're taking to the vote. And to your point, the original democracy was for the educated, and I think in Roman times the Senate represented the people and all those sorts of things. And democracy was originally representation of the people, but the people didn't get the vote. There's a guy called H.L. Mencken who worked for the Baltimore Evening Sun, and on the 26th of January 1920 he wrote this, and he was I thought, when I first read this, I thought this has to be made up. But Mencken is real, and he was considered to be a great economic and political mind, and he had this very visionary in his thinking. And he wrote, "As democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be occupied by a downright full and complete narcissistic moron." So he penned that in July 1920. You may like Trump, you may not like Trump, but you sit there and read that and you think, certainly Trump is narcissistic. I look at the Trump election of a couple of years ago, and when you look at the media map, the influence map, from that election, you look at where people got their information from, it's saturated by individuals running blogs or running Facebook posts or whatever it is, but the influences are much greater than the traditional media outlets. And so that means that I get on and I go, I do or do not like Trump as the next president. This is my opinion. I have a following, and they believe me. There's no fact checking. I have no motivation to do a good job because there's nothing chasing after me. If you're the paper and you say something publicly, you get taken out by a libel suit and you change your mind in a real hurry and you apologise and you pay someone a lot of money. But social media is not like that. Social media, you can say whatever you want and it doesn't have to be true. But if you've got influence, people follow you. And I know I'm on a tangent in terms of masculinity in modern times, but I do believe a lot of the definition of modern masculinity comes down to people's opinion and what it should be. But to me, the most endangered species on the planet right now is middle-aged white men. And I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but I look at this world that we're in, and we're so PC and so righteous, we completely miss the point of looking after society. And, so people will get all up in arms and completely ignore in this country domestic violence and the fact that another child's been killed by somebody. And humanity and the society we live in, if you scratch the surface too hard, it gets ugly pretty quickly.
The middle-aged white man, essentially now the face of vitriol, actually, which I think is actually very unfair. And I'm clearly never going to grow up to be a middle-aged white man. But I feel that that's actually really, really unfair. Some of the greatest people that I've ever met in my life and still have in my life now would fit in that demographic. I do think that it's an easy scapegoat as a representation of more of a class or a group of people that came before us. And I think the rise of feminism is a response to, and in some cases, I think, poor leadership from the past, and the pendulum has swung the other way, and to revolt and rebel against that, which I think is fair. And I think this is why I think masculinity is such a big and important thing now, because values and boundaries and basically the ego thing, I feel like is hands down one of our inherent weaknesses that I feel that every man needs to face that weakness and that flaw that they have, so they know how to set up boundaries and overcome that.
Men are still very programmed in that hunting, gathering, sourcing and supplying and providing model, and women are still very biased towards looking after and protection and doing other stuff. And I think societally going back, part of the confusion we have is women want to show that they're as good, if not better, than men in a commercial environment, but they end up doing everything. So the man's job remains the same. The woman's now trying to balance being a mother and looking after the house and being a whatever. And I had someone that worked for me for a long time recently, someone I respect enormously, who she was moving cities and had had found out about a job that looked really interesting to her, but she wasn't going to apply for it. And I said to her, tell me the one thing that I hate most about women in business. And she said, you hate the fact that women look at a potential job and say they can't do it because they can only do 70% of the role, while a guy will turn up and go, I can do half of that, she'll be right, mate, and apply for the job and get it. I went, yeah. So go and get the job. And she did. And she was brutally honest with her prospective employer, saying, I have very little skill in this area, but I can learn. And I've told her she's got access to any of the resources at SKOPE that she needs to assist her in learning and all the rest of it. And she's gone and got the job, and I'm immensely proud of her. If you were to look at recent time, last century was punctuated by war more than anything else. Extreme violence against humanity. First World War, arguably never finished. We plunged into the Depression. Straight after the Depression, there was the Second World War, and then there was Pol Pot, and there was all these, the Korean War, the Vietnam War. There were wars punctured all over the place, and it was sort of a century of civilized war, if that makes sense, because we weren't supposed to be barbarians. We were supposed to be cultured people, and we were supposed to we'd got past the Industrial Revolution. We were supposed to be intelligent and look after each other. Well, that didn't work so well. I don't see that that's particularly going to go anywhere. Humans we get grumpy with each other, and we go straight back to our basic instinct. You watch people talk about masculinity and ego and everything else. You watch people when they get drunk, and their inner selves come out, and without any restraint, suddenly you and I are punching the shit out of each other in a bar because, that seemed like a good idea at the time.
So I was recently caught a clip from the Joe Rogan podcast, because he also touches upon this subject. Well, he called it weak men. And he kind of got onto the idea with I think it's Harvey Bernstein, the big Hollywood mogul person that ended up being a horrendous person. The reason they're weak men, their insecurities have driven them to some kind of position of power. But the hole in their hearts essentially never got filled, and so they try to fill it externally through some way to make them feel like that thing is covered now for them. And so he actually makes a point, which is probably one of the best things you can ever teach anyone, regardless of whether they are bullied or the bullier, is to teach them martial arts. Because if there's anything, there's a discipline in that, and if you feel like you're a weak person, you gain a strength, and if you feel like if you come into it thinking that you are overconfident, you learn very quickly. You learn how to control that, but you also learn very quickly that there is always going to be a bigger person out there.
Yeah. Motor racing, similar disciplines. I think there's an awful lot of insecurity in power. I think people end up in positions of power. They either do it because they focus on it and they drive to it, or they do it through some fluke of history. And I think men are inherently insecure. It's one of our drivers, women less so. And I think that's again a reflection of the breadth of personality that we have as different genders. Women are much stronger than men. I mean, physically I'm much stronger than women, obviously, but in terms of breadth of personality and character and all those other things, I think women are stronger. They have to deal with a lot more in their life, including deal with men. And it's just one of those things where I think you can be super powerful and still rock yourself to sleep at night because you feel that you're not successful or people don't appreciate you or whatever it is. And it's like that diamond trader. And so he was a man who was worth billions of dollars, wildly successful, had all the houses in the right places, surrounded by beautiful women, all that sort of stuff, but hated how short he was. So this is something he has no control of. I always laugh when people who are very beautiful think they're magnificent. Well, go and thank your parents. You had nothing to do with it. Beauty, aesthetics are dictated by the DNA of your parents, not by you. You might be good at makeup, but that's about it. So this guy is considered the best on the planet. He ticks all these boxes for success. He's so insecure he gets a CFO to read out his bank balance to him several times a day and dies on a surgery table in Paris having some sort of penis extension surgery. Wow. Wow. So here's someone that you would, by every single measure, rate as successful, but stagnantly insecure. He would most certainly call himself an alpha male. So the Harvey Weinstein thing for me is, I get why men and women interact with each other on a social basis and become lovers and stuff at work. You spend so much time with people, you interact, you socialize. Whether or not you would call it socializing initially, you end up at work dinners or whatever. But you've always got to be super conscious. The boss part of that equation, the person with the power. If I go out to dinner with someone I work with, I'm always in a more powerful state by the very nature of the fact that I'm the boss. So it doesn't matter how equal we think we are in a social context. If that social context ever dissolves to a point where it's about the business, I have more power. Harvey Weinstein always had more power. Where he was a dick about it is he actively used his power to get what he wanted out of people. If you fall in love with someone you work with because you fell in love with them because you ended up there by mistake, that's a bit different. It might be messy, but Harvey Weinstein, as I understand it, actively used his power and influence to get what he wanted out of people. The flip side of that was people that wanted or needed Weinstein's blessing gave him what he wanted. And so it became this reinforcing circle of bad behavior because he felt entitled to it, presumably. And he, interviews, he said, I'm really insecure. People, no one will love me. No one will look at the state of me. I'm fat and overweight and everything. Well, do something about it. Don't eat so much shit. Lose some weight. Go to the gym. And the reason people don't like you is because you're an asshole. It's got nothing to do with how you look. In that context, clearly has a massive ego, but it's shrouded in insecurity. It would be my guess. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist, but I meet lots of people that have massive egos, but are staggeringly insecure. My baseline is that most men are insecure. And it's, we get beaten up by love, we get beaten up at work, we get beaten up by not meeting other people's expectations, by not meeting our expectations. It takes a lot of effort to survive in society today and try and meet everyone's aspirations. I mean, try having a teenage daughter. There's this brutal moment when some switch somewhere gets flicked and you're no longer daddy, the superhero. You're some grunting verbalization that might sound like dad, and the only time you're ever loved and adored is when your daughter wants something. So that's a very brutal period.
So what would be your opinion, or I guess just your take on something like letting go? That's a concept that's been playing up a lot in my mind lately, especially I guess in the process right now where my business is up for sale. That idea and the concept of just letting it go.
So I'm terrible at letting things go. If something pisses me off, if I'm angry about something, I can't sleep. I need to go and smash out an email. Fuck you. Look how brilliant I am. Email. And I recommend that to anyone. Write the email. For God's sake, don't send it. You have to have a point of venting. You have to have something that allows you to release that emotional pressure. And so for me, if I've got an issue that's driving me nuts, I won't be able to sleep. I will grind away at it for days sometimes. But the important thing is to allow yourself a vent. As I said, talk to someone you trust, write the email, write down things on paper, whatever it is. Just do not engage directly with the issue until you have complete clarity of what your message is going to be and what the solution is. There are things that it doesn't matter how much gnashing of teeth you give it. There's nothing you can ever do about it. And the venting process will allow you to deal with some of it, but some of it is literally giving up, hunting the solution to that. And there are some things that that if you went down this path, you'd be able to prove that person right. But the energy and the cost of it's just not worth it. And it's better to do other things with that time and energy. So I think I know when I'm pretty good at knowing when I'm being a dick about something, but I still have to be a dick about it. But what I have learned to is not to be publicly stupid about it. I'm not perfect in that respect in any way, but there's an awful lot of things I deal with where I will sit in my office at 2 o'clock in the morning writing an email or something, and I'll read it the next day and go, I'm pleased I didn't send that. Because you calm down, the emotion, sting comes out. You may still want to send an email to the person to make your point or to put them on notice that this behaviour is unacceptable or whatever it is you're trying to prove. But the more emotional it is for you, the less emotional the response engagement should be. And so, I remember years ago having a major issue with my father, and we were both not happy with each other. And it took me a week to write the letter. And every day I would put it away and I'd come back out and would be red ink all through it until I sent a very objective, very specific and objective email. And my father's response to me was, "In your undated letter." That was the only thing he could pick on. So it was a pretty good letter. And it sorted our issue out. But if I'd sent him a fuck you email, it would have just blown it all out of proportion again. And again, that comes down to, unless you're in a good mood or doing something very light and non-specific, written communication is always dangerous because there's an assumption as to how the other side are interpreting it. So if you're dealing with something really difficult and you add emotion to a written communication and the other side is not in exactly the same mood as you are, the opportunity for misinterpretation is massive. It's better to send a really objective email that defines the boundaries or the criteria, whatever it is you want to discuss, and then ring them. And then if it gets out of control verbally, say, look, we need to take a break. I'm going away to think about what you've said.
There's a story with Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War where I forgot the general on his side, the main general. They had pushed back the opposing side, and they could have actually ended the war then and there if they had actually pursued them and crossed over the river into their territory and basically pretty much decimated the remaining forces as they were running away. But the general stopped. He didn't want to cross the river. And Abraham Lincoln just absolutely lost the plot. Obviously, he wasn't actually there in person, but when he got wind of the news, he just lost it. So he wrote this massive letter just basically berating this general. And so he wrote it all out, and he gave it to his wife to send. The wife never sent it. She just never posted it. Many days later, he turned around to her and was just like, just eternally grateful, because he had enough time and space then to finally to sort of take the time to sort of consider the position his general was in after the months of endless fighting and the war, and also the
death, the carnage,
and the back and forth as well. It wasn't like it was always a one-sided battle. It wasn't. It was a very back and forth battle, and it wasn't just we stopped because we feared. It was we stopped because we didn't really know what we were going to walk into. So it was a very cautious tactical decision. And with that in mind, in hindsight, with a bigger picture, we can see now, like, yeah, he would have very decisively won and basically stopped.
Yeah, but he could have walked into an ambush.
Exactly.
And been slaughtered. We've talked previously about behind every great man's a great woman, a strong woman. And my position's always on that is that the strong woman behind these men are their balance. If you're those people and you are the boss, the super boss, you run your country, people working underneath you are less likely to criticize you and less likely to invoke your disdain by not agreeing with you or not doing what you're told. And in many cases, you don't have the flexibility to not do what you're told. Whereas your wife doesn't give a shit about any of that. She will tell you you're being a dick. She will put you in your place immediately. And that's what the strong women allow them to go and do their difficult job by making their private life easy. But they also don't take your shit. They'll tell you when you're wrong. And I met a very, very wealthy guy in the States years ago who was an investment, a capital investor. And I said to him, I work for my family, and I've the stress between my parents running the business and interaction, all the rest of it, it's always been there. How do you manage that when you're so successful? And he said, that's easy. I abide by one law at home. And I said, what's that? And he said, a happy wife gives you a happy life. And he said, she runs our home. She runs our life, private life, and all the rest of it. So I run the universe, and I have X thousand employees, and we turn over whatever billions of dollars it was, and just bananas numbers. And he said, but when I go home, yes, dear. And I said, there was a couple of rules. I think he said they own 5 houses. And he said, of course, we can own more houses, but there needs to be some balance and some control. So she's only ever allowed to have 5 houses. If she wants to buy a new one, she can go and buy a new one. She will talk it through with me, but she'll do all everything, but she has to sell a house, and I have to agree to sell that house. And be it a boat or whatever it is, but I almost have one room. Every single thing we have, I have one room which is mine, which means I do the interior design of it. I dictate absolutely what's in my room, and when I'm in a shitty mood and behaving badly at home, she will tell me, like a child, to go to my room. And that's when I come home, my life is made simpler by the fact that my wife runs all of it. I don't have to think about it. And he said, I figured that out at a very young age. I've married this extraordinary woman. She's perfect for me, but she takes no shit from me whatsoever. So if I'm behaving badly, she pulls me up in a real hurry. And so at home, that's her universe, and she rules it with an iron fist. and I am one of her minions. When I go out into work, people do what they're told. And a wife, a partner, a good partner will always tell you objectively who you are and what you're doing. And if you're being a dick, they will pull you on it. Whereas an employee will never do that. A really brave employee or someone who's really close to you, but you still have that power. You still have the ability to go, no, I disagree with you, we're doing this. So my executive team have no problem telling me what they think of me, and I want that.
I think boundaries, balance, controls and boundaries, I think are so important for life, especially I think for men. That level of discipline and control is paradoxically, I think, what actually gives us freedom. I've noticed in my own life, the times when I've had the most sort of like when I've had the most integrity happening, that was also the times that I've actually been the freest, because all the things that I need to do, one, are done. The way that I'm acting, the way that I'm being is stable, is in place. So once those boxes, my foundations are basically all really well set, which means anything in between is now freedom to be how I want and it gives me the flexibility to actually to live that life without causing any harm or damage to myself or to anyone else around me. And yeah, it was one of the weirdest, strangest ironies that I think I ever came across, is how when I was being the most disciplined and what would seem like the most boundaries, I was probably the freest, but just mentally and emotionally as well. The amount of freedom that and space that actually provides for me on a mental and emotional level was actually really, really profound as well.
I think men are pretty binary. Our lives, and again, sweeping statement, our lives are pretty focused from the outset. We're given trucks to play with or soldiers to play with, and through school you're told about career, and you grow up with expectations as to what you're achieving and all the rest of it. And the same happens with girls, but with boys, I think the fact that we don't have children means that we stay in that very narrow slot most of our lives. Our friends, we tend to have smaller, less dynamic groups of friends. They tend to be focused. Those relationships tend to be focused on events. So be it motor racing or rugby games or whatever it is. It's not, if our world's ending because we've broken up with a girl, we will deal with how we feel emotionally before we'll engage our friends, whereas women are much broader and have much stronger social networks in that context. And I just think part of the reason that men go so bananas when they retire is you've had this extremely focused drive your entire life, and then you stop and you don't know what to do. With women, it happens earlier, and what I mean by that is when children move out of their homes, that must be a very brutal experience for women and for some fathers. But if you've been a stay-at-home mother and looked after children and all the rest of it for, let's say, 20 years, suddenly your life changes enormously. But you adapt and you move on. So as sex, as we get into our later years, 60s, 70s, 80s, that sort of things, men have less strong relationships, and fewer of them, and the men die earlier. Whereas women have stronger relationships and tougher relationships. And I mean, I was noticing the other day, I think a Chinese woman's now the oldest woman to have ever lived at 116 or something. And the previous oldest person was a woman, and the previous was a woman and a woman. You don't get men living into their hundreds. And I think part of that's we do dumb things. And I'm a great believer of the Darwin Awards. We put ourselves out there, we beat ourselves up in rugby games or car accidents or motorbike accidents. So we get to our later ages less physically capable of surviving, whereas women look after themselves better. In that context of what we've been talking about, relationships or work or whatever else, men get to focus. Women allow men to focus. Women don't have the same opportunity for focus, because typically if a man's got a big powerful job, even if his wife works, she's still doing most of the grunt work in the home, whereas the guys, I had a very busy day, darling. Okay, fine. And I take my daughter to school as often as I can and pick her up when I can, because I get to spend time with her because I spend so much time overseas. And that's my, again, teenage daughter. All I get is grunts now, and the suffering, pleading eyes of "please don't kiss me in public, Daddy," as she offers me the top of her head to kiss, which is not quite the same. But that's an engagement I get, because otherwise, if I only saw her on her terms and incorporated work and travel, it's, I typically kiss her goodnight once she's asleep because she hasn't come to say goodnight or something. So there's this, and I'll go and say goodbye to her even though she's sound asleep when I go away in the morning. I had to leave at 6 o'clock or something the other morning, so she grunts in her sleep and rolls over and I'd take off. So, and I'm not sure how I got to this conversation, but I think it went back to the fact that I slightly think that women are more dynamic than men. Men are very binary and less dynamic, and I think that's part of the reason that women are better at dealing with what life throws them. Women are better at accommodating men than men are women. And I think that's why when men are powerful and strong and focused, having someone good in partnership with you allows you to achieve those goals, because they get that. And but they also act as your, I think it's called a Freudian mirror. You'll know more about it than me. When you look at a mirror, when you see yourself and others, a good partner will never let you get away with your own bullshit.